Center for Women, and I am really happy to be here with you all tonight for this keynote, this Women's History Month keynote, this Gender Equity Summit keynote on womanist leadership with Dr. Melina Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah, I was saying before that we tried bringing you here last year before the pandemic.
Yes, right before the pandemic.
Yes, right before. I remember watching things happen in LA thinking, we probably shouldn't bring this person here. Things sounds like that virus is all over Los Angeles. So I'm glad that we were finally able to get you here, even if it's only virtually.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, we're excited about the work you've done and what you'll share with us. So I want to get just a couple of housekeeping things out of the way, and then we'll really let the things begin. So okay, I have to say thank you to our Department of Women's and Gender Studies here at the university and to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for making tonight possible. So we are going to record this event so that some of the folks who couldn't make it here will be able to see it later. If you're somebody who does not want to be seen on camera, go ahead, shut your camera off. Maybe you just want to use your first name. If though you're willing to show your face, please do. It's nice when we can all see each other's faces and be here like that together. So we do also ask that you keep your mic muted. So like right now I see somebody who's not muted, so Danielle will take care of that. If you can keep yourself muted, it can cut down on noise, and that way we can hear the speakers a little bit better. So thank you for that. Also, we're going to do some questions and answers at the end. We have Dr. Rachel Dudley here from the Department of Women's and Gender Studies. She's going to facilitate some extra dialogue with Dr. Abdullah. And in the interest of time and just to kind of keep things smooth, we'd like for you to submit your questions via the chat box. So go ahead and put them there. If you don't want everybody to see your question, feel free to send it directly to Dr. Dudley in the chat box. All right, I think that's it. Danielle, am I missing any of the housekeeping? No? Okay, good. So I have invited one of my supervisors, and I'm gonna say one of my mentors here at UT, Dr. Michelle Solis, to do the official university welcome. So we do it in academia, right? All sorts of welcomes and introductions. So I'm gonna quickly give you a little introduction, Dr. Solis. All right, Dr. Michelle Solis serves as the Associate Vice President for Student Success and Inclusion within the Division of Student Affairs here at the University of Toledo. In addition to leading the Office of Multicultural Student Success, Dr. Solis provides leadership to Upward Bound, Toledo Excel, Career Services, and the Catherine S. Everly Center for Women. With 20 years of experience in higher education, Dr. Solis has served in numerous key roles across the institution, including in the Office of the President. As the Executive Director of Academic Support Services and in collaboration with partners across the institution, Dr. Solis increased the usage and visibility of academic support services, which led to increases in retention and graduate rates of students. Prior to her role in the Provost area, Dr. Solis served as Dean of Students. And during her tenure, LGBTQA initiatives, including an LGBTQA advisory board, were formed, and the institution was recognized as an LGBT-friendly campus by Campus Pride. She's active in the UT Latino Alumni Affiliate, serves as a mentor to Latinas and African-American female students. She teaches managing diversity in the workplace for the College of Business and Innovation. And this past summer, she was at all the protests. So I thought, who better to do the introduction than Dr. Solis? So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Angie. That was wonderful. When you, I was mouthing probably because I had mute on when you said she was at all the protests. Weren't we all? Weren't we all there in spirit if you couldn't be there in person? Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's been a wonderful day this morning. Our panel talked about mentorship, leadership, and empowerment. There were breakout sessions to talk more about women in public service, women in education, and gender equity in those areas, as well as gender equity and women's health. some conversation about intersectionality, very important. And I am so excited to hear Dr. Abdullah this evening. Dr. Abdullah, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Ethnic Studies. And I just have to tell you, I went to Bowling Green State University, and I think I was a freshman when they made Ethnic Studies 101 required for everyone, every person. You had to take that class to graduate. And you would have thought they were cutting off everybody's right hand. There were protests everywhere. So taking that class changed my life. So thank you for fighting for ethnic studies. I, although am not introducing Dr. Abdullah, Tayana White is going to share with us Dr. Abdullah's history. If I could just say a few words about Tayana. She is majoring in women and gender studies. She is one of my mentees, and I have known Tayana since she was a freshman. She is a leader on campus. She's going to go work in student affairs, and she is going to change lives. Tayana, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Good evening, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Solis, for the lovely introduction. I'm blushing, you can't tell. I would also like to thank the Eberly Center for the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. Dr. Melina Abdullah is a recognized expert on race, gender, class, and social movements. She was among the original group of organizers that convened to form Black Lives Matter and continues to serve as the Los Angeles chapter leader. She is also professor and former chair of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. Dr. Abdullah earned her PhD from the University of Southern California in political science and her BA from Howard University in African American Studies. Professor Abdullah is a womanist scholar activist, understanding the role that she plays in the academy as intrinsically linked to broader struggles for the liberation of oppressed people. Professor Abdullah is a leader in the fight for ethnic studies in the K-12 and university systems. It was a part of the historic victory that made ethnic studies a requirement in the Los Angeles Unified School District, also serving on the task force for the advancement of ethnic studies for the California State University system. Abdullah is the author of numerous articles and book chapters with subjects ranging from coalition building to womanist mothering. She has contributed to popular media outlets, including The Root, Los Angeles Times, Truth Dig, Los Angeles Sentinel, Los Angeles Progressive, and BK Nation. She is also co-host and co-producer of the weekly radio program Beautiful Struggle, which airs on KPFK, part of the Pacifica Radio Network, and hosts and produces the weekly internet radio show Move the Crowd, which airs on Radio Justice. From 2014 to 2018, Dr. Abdullah served on the Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission, where she initiated and chaired the county-wide hearings on community experiences with policing and was instrumental in replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. Dr. Abdullah also serves on a number of boards for, among others, the Black Community, Clergy and Labor Alliance, California Faculty Association Los Angeles Community Action Network, and the National Association for Ethnic Studies. Melina is the recipient of many awards, most recently the 2018 Community Service Award from National Council for Black Studies, 2017 Unsung Heroes Award from the Oscar Grant Foundation, 2017 Extraordinary Service Award from the African Heritage Studies Association, 2017 Justice Work Award from Beyond the Bars, 2017 Freedom Fighter Award from the NAACP, 2017 Activist Award presented by the National Association for Ethnic Studies, among numerous others. She has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, TV One, ABC, PBS, Revolt TV, KTLA, KCET, BET, Free Speech TV, and Al Jazeera. and is featured in the films Waking the Sleeping Giant, 13th, When Justice Isn't Just, and Justice or Else, and in the television series Two Sides. Melina is originally from Oakland, California. She is a single soccer mama of 3 children and resides in mid-city Los Angeles. We are incredibly grateful that Dr. Abdullah can be with us tonight to share her insights into womanist leadership. And again, Dr. Abdullah, it is an honor to have you here tonight. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be with you and to be talking about gender equity in an intersectional way. Thank you, Professor Solis, for lifting up the importance of ethnic studies and how life-changing it is. I know in my own life, I always say that Black studies literally saved my life. I'm a Black woman who was born in East Oakland, and it was really taking Black studies in high school that helped me to step into who I truly am, rather than accepting the identities that are imposed on Black girls. So I think about what my neighborhood was in the 1990s, and it was beautiful. It was loving. It was really rich with creativity and laughter and joy and love, but also trauma and oppression and over-policing and violence. And those things threatened to pull me in particular ways, and did pull me in particular ways. And it wasn't until high school when I was able to I went to Berkeley High School, which was the first, at the time, the only high school in the country with a Black Studies department. And while I didn't become like a stellar student there, I would actually drop out of high school. Those classes planted seeds that allowed me to become who I am. And so I'm grateful that it also helped you and continues to be such a force in our world. And I think that as we talk about ethnic studies, one of the tenets of ethnic studies is really moving forward with intellectual work, honing intellectual tools that lend themselves to revolution. In Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA, we say we're the intellectual arm of the revolution. And the intellectual work that we do is always intersectional. So ethnic studies, there's this language of intersectionalism that emerges after ethnic studies, but ethnic studies also emerge as an intersectional way of studying and being and engaging in intellectual work, even before there was a language like intersectionality. And so I come to you with that lens, and I thought about what I was going to say to you. I've had quite some time to think about what I was going to say, because as has been talked about, initially I was going to come last year. So I've had time to think about what I was going to say. And because it's a smaller group, I'm going to say things that I hope won't get me in trouble in the recording, but I'm going to be a little bit more candid than I might normally be if it was a large audience. So I hope that's okay, that we can just have a really candid and frank conversation about gender equity, about the role of Black women in the struggle for feminism, and about the way in which we all must use this moment to struggle forward right now. And so I just want to begin by saying that when this opportunity first came up, I thought about what it means to have a Women's History Month, and the concept of feminism and gender equity. And my mind immediately went back to being 21 and a 22, and a second year graduate student at USC. And I was in a political science program. There were no, again, in the 90s, there were no or very few graduate programs in ethnic studies and in Black studies. I think there was only two, one at Temple University and one at UC Berkeley. And I decided instead I would study Black power through political science. And so I went to USC and studied under someone who is now my ancestor, but at the time was my academic father, Dr. Michael Preston, who wrote the book, The New Black Politics. And I was studying under him, and I was one of very, very few Black students. There were two other Black men in my program and no other Black women. And I had become really good friends with a woman who I'm still good friends with, named Gail, a white woman. And we would often like commiserate after lectures. And some of you know what it's like to be the only Black one in the class, and how things often happen that in class, anytime you're talking about something Black, the whole class turns and looks at you. You know that feeling? Do y'all know that feeling? Right. So sometimes even if you don't have somebody Black in the class with you, it's really good to have a friend in the class who you can actually at least share that experience. And Gail was that for me, even though she was a white woman. And so we're walking out of class, and we had been talking about something. I don't remember who it was we were reading, but it was some male author, and he'd said some off things in his writings. I want to say it was like Emil Durkheim, who I always think that the problematic one was Emil Durkheim because I really don't like him. But we were walking out of class, and Gail turns to me as we're exiting the building, and she says, "Yeah, so for us feminists," and I remember like stopping dead in my tracks, and I looked at Gail, her long blonde hair flowing, and she's looking so innocent and like, "Why are you stopping?" And I looked at her and I said, "I ain't no damn feminist. I want a man to open a door for me," right? Because in my mind and in my understanding, feminism meant opening my own doors and paying for my own dinner. And I didn't want to do either of those things, right? And I realized in that moment that Gail and I weren't as alike as I thought we were. And I started thinking about feminism and thinking about this expectation that as a Black woman, I was a feminist. And I thought, I'm not like any of those feminists that I'm reading about or thinking about or conjuring up in my imagination, because in my imagination, a feminist was someone who wanted to open her own doors, pay for her own meals, who didn't want to wear bras, who let her underarm hair grow long enough to braid, right? Who was fighting for things like the right to work when my mother and grandmother and great grandmother had always been laboring and doing too much work, when they wanted rights to abortion, when Black women wanted rights to have children and raise our children in ways that would honor their humanity. And so I didn't see myself as aligned with a feminist movement. I thought feminism was the work of white women who didn't have anything else to do and wanted to claim some struggle that really paled in comparison to my life and my struggle. And so I said to Gail, "I ain't no damn feminist. I ain't no damn feminist." And it would take another year before I would be introduced to Bell Hooks and read her work, Feminism is for Everybody. And I would kind of back away from those words, "I ain't no damn feminist," because in Feminism is for Everybody, Bell Hooks tells us that feminism isn't about opening your own doors or paying for your own meal or letting your armpit hair grow, right? Feminism is about a movement to end sexism and sexist oppression, a movement to end sexism and sexist oppression. So maybe I am a damn feminist, right? But somehow, even that definition rang a little hollow. It didn't get to the truth of the life I had lived. Yes, I wanted to end sexism and sexist oppression. Yes, I wanted equal pay for equal work, right? Yes, I didn't want to be hooted and hollered at as I walked down the street. Well, not often at least, right? But it wasn't my primary struggle. And I had to think about why even that rang hollow. So I wouldn't say I ain't no damn feminist, but I would say feminism isn't enough. And I would later read the works of people like Patricia Hill Collins, who in Black feminism talked about the simultaneous identity that we carry, right? What it means to be Black and woman and Black woman all at the same time. And that starts to awaken my soul and awaken my spirit and starts to resonate with me. And then I would read All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave. The writings of people like Barbara Smith, people like Barbara Christian, people like Patricia Hull, and so many others who had been a part of the Combahee River Collective, Black women who had been gathering since 1974, and in 1977 wrote the Combahee River Collective Statement, which proudly states that Black women's liberation cannot be an adjunct struggle to the liberation of some other group of people, right? That we deserve freedom because we deserve freedom, because we are Black and women all at the same time. And some of us are lesbians, and some of us are poor, and some of us are Muslim, and some of us are oppressed along all of these different axes simultaneously. And we have the right to be all of who we are and struggle from that place all at the same time. And so I would begin to know Black feminism, and then I would think about my favorite fiction writers, women like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. And I would read In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, where Alice Walker writes, "Womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender." And I would finally say, now that's what I am. I'm a womanist. I'm a womanist. See, I wore this shirt for y'all because it starts off lavender. Let me stand up and model. It starts off lavender, but see, it gets to purple, right? It gets to purple, right? If you look at these gradations of color, right? If you look at lavender and purple, if you think about what that means, what Alice Walker means is only Alice Walker could say it. That in order to have lavender, in order to have feminism, you have to begin with womanism. You have to begin with purple. If you think about that relationship, right? Purple is the deeper, truer thing. Lavender is a derivative of purple. In order to get lavender, you have to start with purple and then water it down a little bit, right? Add some white paint, whiten it up, right? Lighten it up. And so if feminism is a movement to end sexism and sexist oppression, the deeper, truer thing is a movement to end oppression, is a movement that begins with Black women at the center, doesn't treat us as if we're ancillary, doesn't treat us as if we're some asterisk among women, right? It reminds us that the struggle for liberation, the struggle for freedom, the struggle to end oppression didn't begin in the 1970s, didn't begin in the 1800s, didn't begin in the 1700s. It began before we even began to measure time. So when we talk about the right to be all of who we are and to step into our fullest selves, we have to begin with women like Hatshepsut, who in 1450 BC said, I'm not a queen, I am a pharaoh, and struggled for the freedom of African people back then, and whose body is buried in the Valley of the Kings, whose spirit continues to permeate throughout that land. If we're going to begin with Black women at the center, we have to think about the Dahomey warrior women who in Benin and throughout West Africa were the most elite group of fighters and warriors who beat back colonizers who attempted to come for our kingdoms and queendoms, right? We have to think about women like Queen Nzinga, who in Angola was thought of as the most brilliant military strategist in all of African history in the 17 and 1800s we're talking about. If we're going to talk about beginning with Black women at the center, we need to think about the research done by people like Nadav and Philomena Chioma Steady, who talk about what West African pre-colonial gender roles were, and the fact that women whose names that we don't know actually ran those societies, right? Because it made sense, because the men were off hunting and doing whatever the hell the men were doing, right? And the women were there to hold it down. And so what sense would it make for men to rule societies when they weren't even there? It was the women who were the keepers of society, right? And we have to begin with that framework. We have to begin with the framework of those mamas, those women's bodies who were stolen from West Africa. And I want to offer to you just a quick story, a quick recent memory that I've had. So in summer 2019, I was finally blessed to visit West Africa for the first time. And it was my fourth trip to the continent. My first trip was actually to Egypt, where I visited King Pharaoh Hatshepsut's tomb in Egypt. And then I went to Morocco, and then I went to South Africa. And in 2019, I finally went to Ghana. And I went with one of my dearest sister friend priestesses. Her name is Dominique de Prima. And she's the daughter of Amiri Baraka, and she's a revolutionary, she's a poet, and she's a priest. And she brings Black people who have found their homes in the Americas back to the continent of Africa every summer. This is the first summer she didn't lead a trip. But on that delegation in 2019, which was the year of return, the year that we were asked to go back to West Africa to mark the 400th anniversary of our theft from the continent. You know, I was blessed to be a part of that trip and go to Ghana. And towards the end of our trip, and there were about maybe 30 of us who went, and we'd all formed these really beautiful bonds. And my mother had been to Ghana about 8 years before I had. And my mother and my Baba talked about the importance of that trip for them. And my mama, who's, you know, a Black woman who was raised Christian in the segregated South, she talked about African spirituality and has since stepped into African spirituality more fully. But she shared with me what happened on their trip. And on their trip, she talked about going to Elmina slave dungeon. And many of you know that Elmina was the primary port in West Africa where many of us, regardless of if we were Ghanaian or not, we've traced our roots to Nigeria. But many Nigerians were also transported through Elmina slave dungeon. My mother talked about going to Elmina slave dungeon and going down into the dungeon and being visited by spirit in the depths of that dungeon. And she and my Baba, the man who raised me, who also is a priest in his own right, although he doesn't claim to be such, he is, talked about the spirits of our ancestors, walking with them and returning with them. And they continue to talk about how life altering that was. And so as I wrapped up, we kind of came to the last several days of our trip to Ghana. Sister Dominique led us first to a trip to the Yassine River, the river of the last bath, where our African ancestors were bathed before they were put into these dungeons. And I was overcome at the river, and I was prepared as we went to Elmina slave dungeon to walk down into the dungeons and experience what my mother and what so many others have. If you've ever seen the film Sankofa by Haile Gerima, you'll remember that the protagonist also felt this kind of overcoming of spirit as she was in that same space. And so I went into the slave dungeons preparing myself, and I absolutely could feel the presence of spirit. I could feel the sorrow. I could feel the anguish. I could feel the torture. The stench is still there. Hundreds of years later, the stench is still there, the stench of death, and of people who were forced to attempt to live in their own feces and urine, and the death of people all around them. That's still there. It still hangs in the air. You can still feel how ground in those innards of our people are into that floor. But I wasn't visited by spirit the same way my mother was. And I felt a little disappointed almost. Why didn't spirit visit me? And we were led out of that dungeon. And we were led up into a smaller room. And we were introduced to that room as the women's torture room, the women's punishment room. And there, almost every spirit imaginable visited me. And I just remember being paralyzed in this tiny room and feeling like I had to wait for everyone else to leave. And I did wait. And as I waited, I heard the words. And they were purple words that said, refuse to submit. Refuse to submit. And I was overcome by emotion, and I cried, and I was filled, and I couldn't even share the experience for days. And what it reminds me is that when we talk about a freedom movement, when we talk about a movement to end oppression, it's those spirits that compel us to struggle as womanists. When they said refuse to submit, I thought about the women who were held in that tiny room, who refused to be raped, who bit off penises, who refused to be separated from their children, who would take the bodies of their own children and jump off the sides of slave ships rather than to become chattel and be dehumanized and divorced from their own divinity. I thought about the spirits of those who would become our Mama Harriet Tubmans and our Sojourner Truths. I thought about the warrior ancestor spirit of my own grandmother, Rachel, whose name I carry as my middle name, the first in our family to be brought to the United States as an enslaved African who was broken on the island of Haiti, or attempted to be broken on the island of Haiti. And I thought about what it compels us to do and to be. If feminism is a movement to end sexism and sexist oppression, then I'm compelled. It's not a choice. I'm compelled, and we, those of us who are African, are compelled to fully and wholly and completely step into the movement to end oppression. We are compelled to be what Mama Harriet Tubman would call abolitionists. We are compelled, in her words, to be free or die. Be free or die. That means that we don't have a choice. We can't seek comfortable places in oppression, because this world, especially for you all on this call, who have found spaces in academic institutions that make promises of exceptionalism, you have to reject those false promises. You have to say, I need not only know who I am, but I need to know whose I am. I need to know whose I am. I don't belong to these institutions. I didn't belong to USC, right? I don't belong to Cal State LA. I don't belong to any institution that makes promises of exceptionalism that include good jobs, that include a little bit of money, that include a platform, that include middle-class status. Those are all shiny objects that they attempt to dangle in our faces in hopes that we'll think that we belong to them when we really belong to Mama Harriet, when I really belong to my grandmother Rachel, when we really belong to our Dahomey warrior women, to Queen Nzinga, to Ya Asante Wa. That's who we belong to, and that's whose spirits we have to summon, because this is a moment when the world has cracked wide open. This is a moment when the world has cracked wide open, when all of those spirits that visited me in that women's torture room, those spirits of those who spit in their master's food, who poisoned their master's food, right? Who fed them glass so it would chew up their insides when they ate it, right? Who refused to work, right? Who charted courses to freedom, who built the Underground Railroad, right? Who said, women like Ida B. Wells, who said a Winchester rifle must have a place of honor in every Black home. And I know that's a terrible thing to lift up now that we're talking about gun violence and gun control and those kinds of things, but she was talking about the principle of self-defense. The principle of self-defense, this idea that we must not submit to our own oppression, that it is our sacred duty to constantly struggle with everything in us for the freedom of ourselves and the freedom of our people. And so it's important that we think about this moment when the world is cracked wide open, when it's being held open by those ancestors who walked before us, but also by those recent ancestors who should still be with us. When we say names like Breonna Taylor, when we say names like Sandra Bland, when we say names like Corinne Gaines, when we say names like Waukesha Wilson and Riddell Jones and Megan Hockaday and Mitrice Richardson and Michelle Shirley and Yvette Henderson and Nia Wilson, and we could go on and on and on. Their spirits are holding open a portal that will not be open forever. And we're compelled to walk through it and struggle for freedom, to upend oppression, to engage and build a movement to not only end sexism and sexist oppression, but all oppressions, and to vision and build a world where our daughters and granddaughters can live and walk freely. You know, I don't watch a lot of television, but recently there was a program that came on HBO, a series that came out on HBO called Lovecraft Country. Anybody watch Lovecraft Country? I'm seeing Angie, Rachel. Oh, Rachel, there's another Rachel. So my grandma's here, right? My great grandma. So anybody else watch Lovecraft Country? If you don't, go watch Lovecraft Country. Is it worth watching? Absolutely worth watching. Has anybody read Octavia Butler? Somebody saying, Angie saying, so worth it. If you've read Octavia Butler, it's like an Octavia Butler novel on the screen. It is one of the most beautiful, compelling things I've ever witnessed and experienced, right? It completely overtakes you. And it's like an Octavia Butler novel, or like some of Toni Morrison's work. It's one of those things that you grapple with, right? That you can't just sit and watch and then walk away. You sit and watch it, you go, wait, what did that mean? Right? And then you got to go back and rewatch it. It's so important. It's such an offering, right? So Lovecraft Country is set in 1955 Chicago, and all of the characters, the primary characters, are Black. It's rooted in Blackness. The protagonist is played by Jurnee Smollett, who is one of my favorite actors, and it's about multiple forms of white supremacy and oppression. And one of the characters in the series is a girl named Dee. She's a 14-year-old girl who fictionally is the best friend of Emmett Till. You'll remember Emmett Till was murdered in 1955 in Money, Mississippi, but he was from Chicago, and his mother, who's one of those warrior women that we talked about, Mamie Till, chose to give an open casket funeral to Emmett Till to show what white supremacy had done to her baby boy. And on the day of his funeral in the series Lovecraft Country, Dee, who had been chased by white supremacy throughout the series, is finally cornered by white supremacy in many, many different forms, including policing, including violent, rapacious, murderous policing. And her body is in jeopardy. And so, like an Octavia Butler novel, there's the kind of real-time story that you can follow, but then there's this kind of Black futurist science fiction that is intertwined throughout it, right? So Dee, her body is in jeopardy, and her spirit is also in jeopardy. And this entire community of folks who are extended family and neighbors, but also her mother, who names herself Hippolyta. And I'm not giving anything away, so go back and watch it, right? Hippolyta, and if you know anything about mythology, you know Hippolyta is the queen of the Amazons. And there's a reason that her name is Hippolyta. A Black woman in 1955, there probably weren't a lot of Black women named Hippolyta, but she chose that name for herself, and you'll understand why towards the end of that series. She needs to save Dee from white supremacy. And so all of these mechanisms work together to create a portal where Hippolyta can use her wisdom and her spirit and her energy to open up this portal to the past, to 1921 Tulsa, where the Black Wall Street bombings occurred, right? And the community is challenged to walk through this portal and save Dee. And what you see is a decision that has to be made to risk our lives and our standings. And I'm intentionally saying our lives and our standing and our comfort in order to save Dee as a 14-year-old Black girl who is the future. This is the moment that we're in. Watch Lovecraft Country, because it is an illustration of this moment when the world is cracked wide open and the portal is being held open by the spirits of our foremothers. And the decision that we have is whether or not we are going to walk through the portal and be abolitionists. Are we going to demand freedom, or are we going to die? Are we going to be free or are we going to die? I would submit that womanism and a womanist praxis is the commitment to live, is the commitment to not only upending unjust systems, but visioning and building new ones where we can actually live, where we can actually save D, where we can actually build a world fit for those daughters and granddaughters that are to come. Womanist praxis says that we are going to not only theorize, but we are going to build. It says we're not going to just respond to crises like the murders of our people at the hands of police, but we are going to proactively vision what new systems can look like. It says that there's no one Hippolyta that's holding open that portal. It's all of us, and it's all of us that are required to walk through, to grab the lessons of the past and bring them into the future. Every single one of us through what Mama Ella Baker calls group-centered leadership. So that means whatever you have, you are required to bring it to this movement to end oppression, whether it be your intellectualism, whether it be your gifts of creativity, whether it be your healing energy, whether it be your spirituality. All of those things are required of us. It requires that we courageously say that we are absolutely using traditional methods. So Black women are absolutely going to the polls each and every time, as Mama Fannie Lou Hamer warned us to do, but she also warned us that we have got to build our own power. So when we go to the polls, it's not just about being Democrats, because as we see with people like Joe Biden, even though he has a vice president who happens to be a Black woman, right? He's saying, by no means will I defund the police, right? He's saying, I'm absolutely gonna still lock kids in cages. He's saying, I'm absolutely targeting Black immigrant women and immigrants of color. He's saying that this is just a lighter brand of white supremacy. This is just liberal white supremacy. Remember, I'm one of the authors of the 1994 crime bill, right? And he's saying that we can't just be saying that we're going to tinker around the edges of fundamentally oppressive systems. He's reminding us, his example reminds us that we have to use traditional resources like voting, because we had to get Donald Trump out of office, right? But also those traditional forms are not enough, that we must vote and organize. Just because there's a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in office doesn't mean we take our hands off the wheel. It means that we have to drive harder and drive faster and imagine together and build together new worlds that say this whole thing has got to topple, and we have a freedom dream of a new world, and we're going to usher that in with everything that we have in us. And so Black Lives Matter was built based on this womanist leadership praxis. It was built based on the idea that all of us are required in order to step into freedom. It was built as an abolitionist model. And so when people say, what does defund the police mean? Does that mean abolish the police? No, it doesn't exactly mean the same thing, but it gets us on our way, right? It means that we recognize that the systems under which we live were intentionally and deliberately designed to produce these outcomes. And sometimes we focus on outcomes that are male-centered, because this is still not just a racist system, but a sexist system, right? It's not just a racist system and a sexist system, but it's also a classist system. It's also a system that specifically targets Black women. And so as we're looking at what freedom means, it's important that we remember that the fallout of these systems isn't just the theft of the lives of people like Mike Brown and Ezell Ford and Trayvon Martin. It's also the theft of the lives of the many women who we named, right? And it's a burden, a constant burden that's placed upon the backs of Black women and girls. And so when we think about Black women being the fastest growing group of incarcerated people, right? When we think about the ways in which Black girls are pushed out of our K through 12 and even our university systems, read the works of people like Monique Morris, who talks about this in the book that we should all be reading about education pushout, right? It means that we have representations of ourselves that haven't changed much from when Patricia Hill Collins was writing about controlling images, right? And so it's not enough to just say we're going to work to end oppression, but we have to build new systems. We have to think about, what does public safety actually mean for us? How do we build community-driven approaches to public safety? How do we remember whose we are? Remembering that it's women like my mama, women like Miss Rose, who sat on porches in Black neighborhoods and made sure that the children got to and from school safely, that actually brought safety to our neighborhoods, right? We have to remember that educational structures are intended to break us. So when we talked about them attempting to break my grandma Rachel on the island of Haiti, educational institutions have become those islands where they've tethered our children now to computers, but when we had in-person learning, to their desks. And I think about my own daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, Amara, who they attempted to break, who her teachers called police on her 8 times in a single semester as an 11-year-old in the 6th grade. The first time they called the police on her, it was because she had a look in her eye. You all remember those stories of enslaved women with looks in their eyes, right? So my daughter has a rebellious spirit, and she had a look in her eye. And so her choir teacher, which should have been the class that was the most free, right, called the police on her, armed police on an 11-year-old child for having a look in her eye. The very next week, he called the police again because this 6th grader had slime in her pocket. I guarantee you, every 6th grader had slime in their pocket, right? But this little Black girl was criminalized for having slime in her pocket, right? And I'm lifting up these examples because these systems, again, were intentionally and deliberately designed to produce these outcomes and have to be upended. But I'm lifting them up because it's on our front porch that my mother, who was an elementary school teacher, imagined what a free process of education would look like, right? That every day when my mother would get home from work and her old Volvo would hit the corner and everybody could hear it hit the corner, every child in our neighborhood in East Oakland would run to her front porch and yell, "Time for school." And my mom would sit on the front porch until nightfall and teach all the children in the neighborhood to read. And they didn't feel tethered to the porch. They didn't feel tied to a desk. They felt free. They felt like they were stepping into themselves as those words took meaning on the front porch of 914 East 22nd Street, right? And so we have the capacity, and I would submit we have the sacred duty to build these new systems. That's what Black Lives Matter is attempting to do. That's what we're doing with policies like the Breathe Act that I want you all to go look up. The Breathe Act, which is 300 pages of beauty that was brilliantly and lovingly written by a Black woman, Gina Clayton Johnson of SE Justice Group. I want you to think about how Black Lives Matter has said that we are going to completely defund the police, beginning with police in schools. And in LAUSD, my daughter Amara, along with Kalila Williams, along with a beautiful young woman whose name is Sierra Leone Williams. What a glorious name, right? along with dozens of others of Black children and Black girls and allies who are not Black, but who see the humanity and the right to Amara and Kalila and Sierra Leone's and Tandiwe's humanity and divinity. They did more than we were able to do. They defunded their school police and removed police from campus completely. They got $36 million invested in Black children. And you know what? The white allies and the Latina allies and the Middle Eastern allies weren't mad about the fact that it went to Black children, because they knew that's where it needed to go, right? They're winning. They're imagining a free future. So the community, in this sense, bringing it back to Lovecraft, has gone back, and we've saved D. We've saved our future, and the future is coming back to save us. And that's the work that we're charged with. If we're to celebrate Women's History Month, let's not just recount these stories of how in the 1970s, women's groups lobbied government, and in 1981, they created and acknowledged Women's History Week, and it became Women's History Month. And we are to study Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and Gloria Steinem, who I like, right? And all of these others. Really what this month should be about is reclaiming the spirit of Hatshepsut, reclaiming the spirit of Queen Nzinga, reclaiming the spirit of Harriet Tubman and of Ida B. Wells and of Mary Church Terrell and of Ella Baker and of Afeni Shakur and of all of the Black women freedom fighters who birthed the Combahee River Collective, and saying that this is a moment that the world is cracked wide open, and we have an opportunity and a sacred duty to summon those women into our spirits and to be rebels, and to say that we're going to be abolitionists and that we're going to create freedom for the women and the girls and the lives that come after us. And so I hope that we can engage in conversation about how we can do that. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Abdullah, that was beautiful. I am sitting over here moved. I got chills, teared up a little bit, describing, and I want to cry again, just thinking about the unfathomable horror of African women when they were enslaved. And even to think about what your own daughter is going through and what you as a mother are going through as you protect her. Thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing with us. I'm making all the notes over here. I do want to pass the mic to my colleague, Dr. Rachel Dudley. She's going to facilitate some dialogue here. Just want to tell you all real quick, Dr. Rachel Dudley is an assistant professor of women's and gender studies here at the University of Toledo. She is hard at work on her 10-year portfolio. So she only takes some invitations, and this was one she happily accepted because she was really excited to be part of this talk. Dr. Dudley received her doctorate in women's gender and sexuality studies in 2016 from Emory University. Her dissertation was titled Haunted Hospital, J. Marion Sims and the Legacies of Enslaved Women from 1841 to 1850. She uses interdisciplinary frameworks to explore medical exploitation and the continuing cultural legacies of enslaved women as medical research subjects within the development of modern gynecology. She's interested in exploring this history in relation to larger themes in cultural medical history and the health humanities. She teaches feminist theory, gender, race, and health, and her research interests include feminist health humanities, medical history, US slavery, gender and medical research, and interdisciplinary knowledge production. So, Rachel, take it away.
Woo! Wow. Wow. I don't know if you can feel this. We need to fan you off, Dr. Abdullah, over there in California. That was absolutely powerful. And we want to say thank you so much. I just want to emphasize some of the key insights that Dr. Abdullah just gave us in that deeply powerful brilliant and moving keynote. So she started with her own bio and background and sort of contextualizing her path, the seeds that were planted in her youth in Oakland, and leading her to her graduate work at USC, talking about the tenets of ethnic studies and how the intellectual tools there fit into broader freedom movements, reminding us that this work is always and must be intersectional in nature. But some of those tensions in that history, where she talks about that one of the colleagues, the feminist colleagues in her graduate class, and sort of those early tensions between womanism and feminism in terms of nomenclature, if you will, and naming practices, where she has that sort of early epiphany where she says, at the time, I ain't no damn feminist. And then sort of rethinking that in the context of Bell Hooks' work on feminism is for everybody, and sort of wanting to push that a little bit further, coming across Patricia Hill Collins' work and folks like Barbara Smith and Barbara Christian, the Combahee River Collective, and then through Toni Morrison, and finally sort of framing her own awakening in relation to Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, in that framework, which gives us the term womanism, and the quote that womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender, in 1983. So sort of reminding us about what the power of placing Black women at the center of not just intellectual analysis, because Dr. Abdullah is a scholar activist, and so that hyphen is important, not disentangling one from the other. But placing Black women at the center of liberation movements, but also reminding us that this is not new work. It doesn't begin in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 17th or even 16th, but taking us back in terms of a new orientation to time, and reframing an orientation to time in relation to Black women, leaders of the Dahomey warriors, in relation to Queen Nzinga and pre-colonial sort of approaches and contexts, and sort of reminding us that this is always deeply spiritual work, and we're doing this work as a matter of sacred duty, if we're doing liberation work. And so placing it then in international context, by talking about her own travels to Ghana and Nigeria, and the slave dungeons in Ghana, and the spirit, the spiritual energy there, at that point of no return off the Ghanaian coast. And the words that came to her, and I love the idea of framing this in relation to spirit work. The words that came to her is this idea of refusing to submit, compelling us to abolition movement, and thinking about the tradition of Harriet Tubman, this idea of we are going to be free or we're going to die trying. Reminding us to reject the promises of exceptionalism that often get framed and presented in institutions, various institutions, corporate and institutions of higher education. To reject those notions of exceptionalism, and to continue summoning those ancestral spirits, those spirits of, we heard all types of powerful names here come through: Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, Finney Shakur, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker's notions of group-centered leadership. These womanist leaders that allow us to envision a world where we can claim a movement where all of us are free. And then she even takes us through Lovecraft country, which is sort of in the tradition, she says, of Black sort of feminist science fiction writer Octavia Butler. And some of those historical moments that come through in that kind of cultural representation, including allusions to Mamie Till, who told us keep that casket open in relation to the white supremacist mob violence directed against her son, which is one of the most horrific and noteworthy cases in history. But also Mamie Till sort of could be said to sort of start a movement of Black mothers, right? So I'm very interested in this note, Black mothers who turn that grief into political mobilization. And so I'm very interested in that notion, some of those historical moments that come through in that cultural representation. And reminding us again that womanist praxis is the commitment to live, to build a world fit for our daughters and granddaughters, and to fight, push back against systemic oppression, including her own example of her daughter Amara, which by the way is also my partner's, one of her daughter's names is Amara. But pushing back against the criminalization of young girls as a matter of doing all of this work as a matter of sacred duty, and really nodding at the end toward this notion of Black futurism and some of the wins, the recent wins that we've been able to make in the Black Lives Matter movement. Speaking of which, this is somebody who was there in the room, literally when it happened, and reminding us that that was always designed as a womanist effort. So those were some of my key takeaways, and I hope I got that right, but I'm sure that there are questions from the audience, and we want to take those. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat box and we'll get to them. But I would start us off perhaps in just asking a couple of things. If you could talk to us about, as I'm thinking about, what it must have meant to Mamie Till to say, keep that casket open, or Sojourner Truth to do the work that she did in abolition in the rooms that she was in, or Harriet Tubman to keep pushing no matter what, and even, say, I got the shotgun on your back, we're not turning back. But to know that that is sometimes deeply traumatic work, to keep going even despite systemic oppression, and despite the fact that our lives can literally be on the line, or despite the criminalization of our daughters, et cetera. How do you keep going in the face of all of this? And what role does spirituality play in that?
So I loved your summary, because I feel like your summary was better than the talk. I should have written down the summary. I was like, I repeated that, but I'll take it.
I was just repeating back verbatim what you gave.
Well, you know what it means is I hope that one day we'll be able to collaborate on something, because the other thing that I was hearing is your research. Oh my goodness, how needed is it right now? And the spirit of Dr. Susan Moore was visiting me as throughout your talk, as we talk about the way in which these medical systems, when we talk about upending systems and needing to imagine new ones, how it stole Susan Moore's life, right? And we saw it happen.
That's
we
right.
saw her life be stolen as she planned it.
She told us what was happening. This is what's happening. They're about to kill me. And then the next day she died.
Right. And so I'm grateful for your work also, as somebody who almost died giving birth to my third child. I'm grateful for your work. And, names mean a lot. Rachel and Amara. Amara, you got an Amara? That's crazy. Yeah, you have an Amara too, right? So anyway, I am grateful for your work. Now I'm forgetting what the question is. What am I supposed to?
You're gonna take it, but I was so moved by the notion of spirituality.
Oh, spirituality.
These institutional spaces can often sort of rip that away, but remembering to anchor us in the notion of spirituality and ancestral spirit work. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yeah, so Black Lives Matter was born July 13th, 2013. That was the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? And so we erupt. I don't have to tell you, the entire Black community erupts. Our allies erupt with us, and we take the streets. And I was blessed to be a part of that work. And I would say for about the first year, we were doing work And we were somehow seeing it as a racial and social justice movement. But about a year in, we were struggling around the murder of a brother named Ezell Ford, who was killed in August 2014 in Los Angeles by LAPD. And about a year in, we always poured libation at actions. We knew that. When someone was killed, we always went out and did prayer circles, but we still saw it as this kind of racial and social justice movement, right? And I'm gonna tell the story that freaks me out. So it still freaks me out. So we were preparing to do a press conference for Ezell, and a sister named Riddell Jones had also been killed, just got killed. So we were thinking about whether or not we were gonna do the press conference at where Ezell's mural was and where he was killed, or should we go to the corner where Riddell was killed and do it there? And we had had this phone call and got off the phone, didn't have any answers. And I said, okay, well, let me go read my kids their bedtime story. And I had Amara, who I always have the youngest child pick out the book, but this time for some reason, I had Amara pick out the book. And Amara is deeply spiritually connected, right? She's one of those kids that if she had been born on the continent, the priests would have taken her to train her, because as a tiny girl, she would put together these little satchels at like 3 and 4 years old, and you'll go, what is this, right? And inside the satchel would be like some sticks and some leaves and some rocks, and she'd say, take this with you today, Mama, you're gonna need it, right? So this is who Amara is, right? Which is also why the system preys on her the way that it does, right? And so I had Amara pick the book, and she picked this book called Sit-In, which I hadn't read, but it was about the Greensboro sit-ins, right? And so I opened the book, and the first page of the book, so remember, we're trying to figure out where to do this press conference for Ezell Ford. Are we going to do it at Ezell's spot or Riddell's spot? Open the book. The first page of the book says there were 4 friends, John, James, Jack, and Ezell. Ezell. Now, I had never heard of anybody named Ezell before in my whole life. Mm-hmm. But here, as I'm asking, where do we do this thing? His name is literally written in this book, right? That's not coincidence. His name wasn't Tony, right? His name was Ezell, right? Mm-hmm. And this book says Ezell. So, you know, it reminded me that the work that we do as Black Lives Matter is spiritual work. And I don't know why I needed reminding. Because again, the first thing that we do when someone's killed is go and pour libation and do a prayer circle for them. Oftentimes we are literally standing on their blood, literally standing on their blood. And so it's absolutely spiritual work. And the role of spirituality and movement, and I don't want to talk too long about it, but I just want to add this, that as we were talking about the tradition of rebellion among Black women, right? As we were talking about Hatshepsut and Yaa Asantewaa and Queen Nzinga and the Dahomey warrior women and Harriet Tubman, you all will know the stories, some of their stories, of women like Harriet Tubman who said that the voice of God spoke to her, right? When she would have her spells, it was the time that she would use to commune with God, and God would tell her her routes. And it's why she was successful in freeing more than 1,000 enslaved folks. I know your history books say 300, but that's a blatant lie. And everybody on this call, I can prove it, because we've been talking about the Combahee River Raid, and every history book will also say she led the Combahee River Raid, and the Combahee River Raid alone freed 700 plus folks. So how do you free 700 plus folks, plus make 19 trips through the Underground Railroad, and somehow that adds up to 300. That's a blatant lie. So Mama Harriet Tubman freed more than 1,000 people because she says she heard the voice of God who guided her to freedom. She never had to use that shotgun on her back, right? And so you're right, that spirituality has always been how we win, right? In this moment, right? We're not going to win. I love Ida B. Wells' words, a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor. But if we tried to all get Winchester rifles, one, we wouldn't, but we couldn't. But two, we're not going to win that way. Do you know how much weaponry the system that's oppressing us has? You're not going to win that way. It's spiritual work that helps us win victories that seem insurmountable.
Ooh, okay. That for us is also the question about how we forge ahead, how we continue to forge ahead. How else but, that connection between spirituality and womanism, by whatever faith tradition, but that connection between spirituality and, how do we keep going in the face of these various mechanisms of systemic oppression. I know we got some brilliant and wonderful, insightful comments and questions that are going to come through in the chat. So just go ahead and drop those in there for us. We have this amazing opportunity with Dr. Abdullah here to get those questions answered. So just drop them in the chat. And unfortunately, it feels like that time really flew by. So we only have about 12 minutes left. So let's see here. Let me scroll up and see. So while we're waiting for those to come through, would you mind elaborating on, Dr. Fitzpatrick said, let's talk about unarmed revolution and what does that look like? You want to jump in there?
So I don't know what it looks like. I know spirit is at the center of it. I know that we're not going to shoot our way to freedom, that's not going to be, the way we get free. And so I don't think the truth is, and some people who write about this, I'm thinking about people like Akinyele Umoja, who wrote the book, We Will Shoot Back. Did you ever meet him when you were in Atlanta?
I don't think so.
Okay, so he was the chair of African American Studies at Georgia State until this year. So he's back to regular faculty now, but he wrote this brilliant book, We Will Shoot Back, about armed self-defense in the civil rights movement. People like Robert F. Williams and the Deacons for Defense and all of their work. That could work in the 1960s, right? That's not gonna work now. But what's lifted up by revolutionary scholars is that we've never seen an unarmed revolution. Well, this is a moment where we're going to see things that we've never seen. And I think that I can't project what that looks like other than it looks like now. It looks like now. And I think that we saw the beginnings of unarmed revolution this summer when millions of people globally refused systems of oppression, refused to go in the house even in the midst of an unprecedented global health pandemic, refused to be separated from each other, refused to turn our eyes to the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that we saw George Floyd's life be stolen. And I think that that's the beginnings of what an unarmed revolution looks like, but I can't be sure because we've never seen it before, right? I also know that spirit will be at the center of that work, that every tool in our toolbox has to be utilized, our intellectual work, our love, our radical love for one another. Another piece that we see happening in the midst of this health pandemic and economic fallout is a reclamation of the principle of mutual aid, which is also an African principle. When we think about people like Richard B. Allen and Biddy Mason and others saying that there is no individualism, there has to be only the collective. And so I think that's also a part of revolution, recognizing that we're a part of a collective. We are not individuals who can afford to search for comfort in the midst of oppression.
Yes. But in this context of rugged capitalist Western individualism, I think Dr. Fitzpatrick has another question more about the spiritual piece, she says, and the work of community care, envisioning new worlds. Can you give us a little bit more about that? This is not an individual thing.
You are speaking my language.
Self-care, but self-care even in itself is communal.
Yeah, so that's my language. So the young ones laugh at me because I say I can't stand self-care because self-care becomes selfish care. But I do believe in community care, right? So I do believe in, I'm looking at the time to see if I have time to share just a quick story. So if it's okay, I'll share a quick story with you of what community care looks like. Okay.
Please.
So some of you might have Googled me, I'm not sure, or have seen there was a little bit of national press coverage when last August my home was swatted. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but you know, I've faced a lot. I've been to jail, all of that stuff many times. And the DA's husband pulled a gun on me last March. You know, I've faced a lot, right? Faced a lot, but I haven't faced this, right? So in August of 2020, I was swatted and I was at home with my 3 children because, you know, it was a pandemic. And what swatting is usually when a white supremacist calls in and makes allegations that something's happening at your house that'll bring a really strong armed response. So I heard the tape. It was a stereotypical white supremacist male's voice, Southern white male's voice, who said that I was being held for ransom. And if they didn't bring $1 million within the hour, they were going to start killing me and my 3 children, right? Wow. So LAPD comes to my house with AR-15s, surrounds my home, helicopter overhead. I live off Crenshaw, so I actually didn't know they were here for me, right? I thought maybe something was happening in the neighborhood. But we also know that they absolutely were participatory in this. LAPD wasn't not trying to do this, right? Because they would the caller actually said he was targeting me because I was with Black Lives Matter, right? So they should know it was a swatting, right? They swatted me nonetheless, surround my house, point these AR-15s in the window. I think about Corinne Gaines and I'm going, oh God, don't kill me in front of my kids, right? So I try to move my kids, get my kids into the safest room in the house. And as this is happening, I knew I had to come out of the house because they said everybody in my address had to come out with our hands up, and they were moving in and they had these AR-15s drawn. And so I knew I had to come out of the house because otherwise they might come in, and something worse than being killed in front of your kids is for something to happen to your kids, right? So I wanted to draw them away from the house. And I thought, well, let me go on Instagram Live because at least if they gonna kill me, I want everybody to see it, right? I want them to see what they did to me. And so I went on Instagram Live, and then I put my hand out the door and say, there's a phone in my hand, it's just a phone, and my kids are in the back room screaming. And I go outside and I didn't know if I was gonna be shot. But what I couldn't see from my front window, because all I could see was the police from my front window, is to my left, my neighbors had all come out into the streets. And they were filming, but also as soon as I stepped foot on my walkway, a brother who lived across the street was standing on my walkway, Otis. And he said, what are you doing, sister? And I said, my kids are inside. I can't. He goes, I got you. And he put his body like inches in front of me. and the sergeant's yelling for me to walk towards him with my hands up. Otis's wife, my sister in spirit, Sophia, she comes and she stands next to me. And the three of us begin to walk together towards the sergeant. And we get there, and of course, it was a complete setup. They were trying to terrify and terrorize us because they didn't even ask, is anybody holding you hostage? No, they did ask that. They asked if somebody was holding me hostage, and I said, what? No, right? They didn't ask me for ID. They didn't come check the house. They didn't check to see if the kids were okay. So they were lying. They knew what they were doing, right? But when we talk about community care, afterwards, people had sped up to my house, just rolled up. I don't know how they got there that quick. People went inside and made sure my kids were okay. After the police left, my kids were shuttled over to Sophia and Otis's house, and Sophia made them pancakes, right? And then because I couldn't be in my own house, somebody gave me their house for 3 months so that we could be safe while we put up security measures at this house. People have donated therapy to my children. That's community care. That's community care. And when I finally went back and asked Brother Otis, so that day I went to work afterwards to it because we were having a protest and a press conference. So I was like, let me not be late to this, right? But when I got back, I asked Otis why he did that. And he said, well, sister, if they started shooting, I wasn't going to let you be the first one to take a bullet.
Wow.
And when we talk about community care, that's why I don't believe in self-care. It's if I tried to care for myself, I'd be dead. But because the community stepped up for me, I would say that we're even healthier than we were before the trauma, because there's these arms of the entire community that are wrapped around not just me, but around my 3 children who think that they're being raised by a single mom, but also know that they have countless aunties and uncles who are making sure that they are safe and happy and healthy and are nurtured.
So 1 minute on this question from Carrie that really blends in quite well with that story on how you balance that. How do you balance activism with scholarly work, she asks, and what advice do you have for activist scholars? I think this is, especially in context where it's not really appreciated or even discouraged. I think this is an important question to end on with maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute left, if we can.
Sure. So, we're abolitionists. Don't look for the institution to give you a nod, right? You got to figure out what your line is. Don't cross, or at least, you figure out what your line is. Go right up to that line and remember whose you are. You belong to your people. You don't belong to the institution that is set up to oppress and exploit you, even though they're feeding you this language of you being exceptional. And so there are going to be repercussions for our struggle, right? There are going to be sacrifices that we have to make. You have to figure out the limits of your sacrifice, but the institution is never going to pat you on the back for trying to upend it.
And on that note, unfortunately, I wish we had more time, but that concludes our absolutely powerful, powerful keynote address for the Women's Equity Summit by Dr. Abdullah on womanist leadership. Very powerful messages there. Round of applause all the way around. We were so honored and privileged to have you here. And hopefully we'll take those powerful messages into our own scholar activist work, each and every one of us. And we'll all keep pressing forward on this mission for social justice and liberation. I want to say thank you so much.
I was talking about you.
That's Mike gonna make an appearance. Is that Amara?
Hey, yeah, that's Amara.
Hey, Amara.
Hi.
We heard. Hey, so good to see you. So good to see you. Your mom was talking about you. Very powerful. Very powerful. So we just want to say thank you so much for your time and blessing us with that time, with your time and with your brilliance there. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to the Epperly Center for Women for putting on this amazing event. And a year it's been in the making to get Dr. Abdullah on with us. So virtual thanks and welcome to the University of Toledo. Thanks on behalf of the Department of Women's and Gender Studies and Dr. Sharon Barnes, our chair. And thank you to everyone, each and every one of you for attending.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And that concludes our talk for tonight, everybody.